From Westville to the hill, West Hills, New Hallville, from Goatville to Upper State, our neighborhoods make us great. New Haven, many voices, one song. Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the community tick. Well, the voters have spoken and delivered a strong message at primary day polls in New Haven, Democratic primary. They chose a challenger, Justin Elliker, by almost 20 percentage points, close to defeat an incumbent mayor, Tony Harp, in the big news in Connecticut politics on Tuesday night. We're here on Wednesday morning, and what did it all mean? Well, we're fortunate to have two of New Haven's keenest political minds in the studio to help us figure that out. I've just subjected them to some difficult music to hear in the morning, so just to get them ready. And I want to say good morning to the Reverend Samuel T. Ross Lee of Emmanuel Baptist Church and Southern Connecticut State University political scientist and former New Haven Republican town chair, Jonathan Wharton. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for coming in.
Good morning, Paul.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to see you both, and I want to thank you, New Haven Hospital, for financial support. So, Reverend Ross Lee, you are a registered unaffiliated voter.
Yep.
And Jonathan Wharton, as I said, you're Republican.
Yes, sir.
So you are not among the 39,000 people who could have voted yesterday.
Exactly.
Or among the 12,000 or so who did vote.
Mm.
But I have a feeling you were watching this election. I
Yes.
had a feeling you cared about what happened.
Occupational hazard, Paul. I mean, I do
You are a
study urban
political scientist.
politics, so
And
if
Reverend
I'm not
Ross
following,
Lee,
I could lose my job.
and Reverend Ross Lee is the person who I like more than anybody else in New Haven to hear what he thinks to say about politics. What did you think about this result, Reverend Ross Lee? What did it mean?
I was not as surprised as I thought I might be. If Elliker won, I do think there is some racial politics going on here.
Mhm.
But I did not see the excitement within the African American community
Mhm.
for Mayor Harp. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I know that it was somewhat lackluster. And Elliker was able to reach inside the black community and get more votes, obviously, than he got before.
That was the surprise to me. Ward 27.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is based on, quite frankly, because I listened to Elliker. I went to the last debate. I watched and listened to his supporters and this sort of thing. I don't really see what he's offering, except being different.
I think that is what the vote was. He's being different, and he didn't campaign as George Wallace. If you say I'm different because I'm going to bring the Ku Klux Klan into Morris Cove, that's one kind of different.
Right.
Another kind of different is I'm not who's in there, and I'm really not going to say anything to offend you. Isn't that a different kind of different?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are a plethora of differences, different kind of differences. But I didn't like the tag corrupt that he kept attaching to her just over and over.
Do you think that was racist?
I think there's some that's racialized. Even if it's not racist, it's racialized because it happens to so many, in particular, mayors, black mayors, in towns where they have less and less resources and more responsibility, and things happen around them. I don't think that Mayor Harp has done anything corrupt. But I think the specter of corruption has been around her. And so she got labeled with that. Her administration is corrupt. As if she went out and decidedly chose corrupt people to serve in her administration and to do corrupt things. And I don't think that's the case.
Mm-hmm. She's never been credibly accused of corruption. There were ethical scandals in every administration, including in her third term.
Right. And the other reason that bothers me is because we had a mayor before her who served for 20 years, and we hardly heard that.
Were you in New Haven in 1997?
I was not in New Haven until.
Okay, I was working in New Haven Independent. We had a 35-part series called City for Sale.
Mm-hmm.
The word corrupt was on the front page, and inside New Haven Advocate for 30 weeks, the FBI came to City Hall and didn't just subpoena. They took away the computers.
Mm-hmm.
Top aides got fired. It was his third term as well.
Mm-hmm.
His career was almost over, and he radically changed the way he did business and whom he hired and whom he fired.
Why wasn't he defeated then?
He was almost defeated, but the person who took him on was not a strong candidate because they didn't realize he was vulnerable, and the candidate did very well. Jason Bartlett was his campaign manager. So 2 years later, the state Senator Martin Looney took him on because he had been so vulnerable in corruption. What happened in those 2 years, Jonathan Wharton knows all about this because he's creating a paper.
We've been talking about
in those 2 years, DeStefano said he's going to change his career by going from being tagged as corrupt. And believe me, this was like much more written than ever about Tony Hart, but it was much deeper, the corruption. Although he wasn't personally taking money. And he said, I'm going to become the number one reformer. So the reason New Haven is the only city in the state that has public financing for elections is he did that to save his career. And he brought in a crew of people and threw with these other people. So Looney, who had a very clean record, ends up running with people who were tagged with corruption because DeStefano had thrown them overboard. So he couldn't press that issue. And then primary day was 9/11. And all the elderly people who were going to vote for Looney stayed home. That's why he survived that. And he was willing to get rid of people. He got rid of people in days after the FBI came. And he went from doing the most corrupt, open way of collecting campaign contributions to making New Haven the number one publicly financed municipal elections. He was not 72 years old. He was starting his career. He was 43 years old. So there's this third term thing. John Rowland got hit with corruption in his third term. He did not survive because the way people do business, they want to change. I just think you're in there for 2 terms. You do a lot of stuff, and then some stuff comes to haunt you, and you have people who didn't like your decisions coming after you. Stuff comes out in the wash because, as you say, imperfect decisions, resources, and some people change and grow from it and survive, and some don't.
Now, one of the other things that I think is problematic about the mayoral reality here in New Haven is this 2-year term.
I agree.
I was here in 2002. As a matter of fact, I served on the Charter Commission where we proposed a 4-year term for the mayor.
Yeah.
The aldermanic council stopped it because the way the process is that they have to approve what the commission has suggested in order for it to go out to the voters. And they wouldn't approve it unless they got 4-year terms as well, which was absolutely, and which remains absolutely ridiculous to me. You have congresspersons serving tens of thousands of people who have 2-year terms, and aldermen serving 3 or 4 blocks.
And it was again, they had charter
terms.
revision again, as you remember, Reverend Ross Lee in 2012, in the 2013 ballot, when alders again shot down 4-year terms. I'm interested you brought that up, and I'm going to hear Jonathan on this too. I actually think that had a lot to do with the election last night. Because of 2-year terms, mayors never raise taxes in odd number years when they run for re-election. So Toni Harp overall has not raised taxes a lot. We have lower taxes than other cities. But she bunched it together at one time. So it became 11%. That number is seared into every voter, black, white, brown, white, whatever. So everyone was mad about 11%. They don't say lower taxes than West Haven or Hampden or whatever. And at the same time, she had long overdue raises that she did in even number of years because she wasn't running. She had top aides who hadn't gotten raises in 6 years, 8 years, because they have this system where we don't give executives raises until there's a union contract for the other employees. And then you get what they got. And they got retroactive raises to their top aides. So that all happened at once. And people were saying this, suppose they recited like a litany. 11% tax increase. Top aides got raises. So over a long span of time, this wasn't so significant. but because of this 2-year term. So I'm with you on Dateline New Haven, which you listen to 103.5 FM, live stream newhavennewhaven.org. So Jonathan Wharton, you've been listening to this very patiently.
I have.
You're going through John DeStefano's paper. Samuel Ross Lee brought up that period. I mean, people, when they were talking about corruption, I think there were real stories here about ethics. We wrote them. But they were nothing compared to what was going on. I mean, like, this administration, the guy who ran the city budget director, you had to go to him for contracts. If you got a contract from him or if you worked for him, you got a letter in the mail on his city hall stationery where it told you, didn't ask you, said, you will donate this dollar amount to the mayor's reelection campaign. And then an envelope came out where you're sending it back, signed, not campaign. City Hall budget director. That's just one of the many.
Wow.
I mean, there's so much wow you wouldn't believe.
But to be fair, a lot of our cities, in Connecticut at least, they face these areas of concern surrounding corruption. Bridgeport, Hartford, we've seen that obviously, back in the early 2000s. And yet those same mayors have reappeared again to run for office.
We were the only major city without a convicted felon for corruption running for mayor last night.
Sure. And that's a good point to bring up. But another good point I think to bring out of this too, and I've really been struck by this. I mean, yes, you can bring out the racial politics, even a bit of whatever attempts there were for coalition politics to take place, which there really wasn't. Generational gap politics. I mean,
definitely.
There's something to be said that you had somebody like Elliker, who is 44 years old, versus the incumbent mayor, who is 72. And I think that's missing in some of this analysis.
And also, they ran as 20th century versus 21st century. Elliker's campaign really worked digital.
Yes.
So if something happened in the news, within 24 hours, you got an email from him to a big list saying, because of this thing that just happened, donate. We tracked that at the Independent.
Yes.
When he had attack on him, he said, we don't like this attack, give me money, has doubled. His website was updated. His email list got really current information. Whereas the Harp team thought that a completely black community-focused vote pulling operation and the only digital was a few individuals' personal Facebook pages, the people who were already their friends, who they knew face to face.
Well,
and also running as an incumbent where your daily conduct of the job was going to be like Rose Garden strategy. And that was last century.
Well, it's interesting because, the mayor's Twitter account finally became more current suddenly this summer. And yet it hadn't been touched in, over a year, maybe a year and a half.
And you can't be something you're not. Toni Harp is not a digital native. Toni Harp is a
But who's around
person.
her? I mean, you got a campaign manager who is 20th century too. I mean, that's what I find so fascinating about these things. We talk about the main person, we talk about the candidate, we talk about the person in office or whatever.
Yeah.
But who's around them?
And that's a really good point. This Inner City writes in, Mayor Harp and her team could have stepped up their social media digital, but they didn't see the value in that. Totally agree with that. So team, Justin Elliker, I would say the key decision Justin Elliker made. Because remember, you had a guy running who was running against someone with a whole career of incredible success in New Haven. 32 years of winning elections. Very popular. They tried to take her down on a whole number of occasions, especially in the mid-90s. White, black, brown support. Really, and he didn't have that same record. So the first person he hired was a young man in his 20s who was a star African-American urban political strategist from Bridgeport who was involved in state politics. That guy knew his stuff. I mean, Tony hired a very qualified person who I don't think had a lot to say with what happened from Torrington. But Elliker hired a star. And it's not that he knew like black female towns that are white people. He knew like the Connecticut Progressive Democrats. But he knew campaigns. And I think that was a pretty fateful decision early on. You talk about who's around you. I think Toni Harp, it's weird. She went to people she felt most comfortable with who do not really, I think, understand the citywide political landscape the same way. And I don't want to insult them because I like these people very much, and I learned from them, some of them. But I don't think they had, I think 2019? I think one team knew 2019 New Haven. I think one didn't. Even though Toni Harp knew New Haven much better in terms of people, institutions, who you call on the phone when something happens,
But that goes back to my main point about generation gaps. And you saw that getting filtered down to the campaign as well. And New Haven is not that unique. We see this in other cities too. But
we
this,
just saw it in Middletown.
that's a good,
the
that's a very good
20-something aide
example.
to
Another
to
example.
Chris Murphy became the mayor in a 6-way race. Smart
That's
kid.
a very good example.
I shouldn't say kid. Yeah, smart young man.
So my bigger question and concern is, what does this mean for the future? When are we going to see a big awakening? In terms of more Generation X and Y and Z stepping up.
Well, we need that nationally. I think the Democrats are suffering nationally.
We do.
And I mean, I'm not saying I'm for Pete Buttigieg. He's actually not my top pick for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
But he's onto something when he talks about this. I mean, Bernie and Joe Biden will not have very clear thinking in the second term if they were ever to be elected. I mean, they're going to be late 80s trying to run the.
But I'm even thinking about Congress. Look at our delegation. Larson, Blumenthal, DeLauro. I mean, they're all in their 70s.
Although Nancy Pelosi has shown me that your 70s, you still can really, like, the toughest person in America against Donald Trump is Nancy Pelosi. She's in her late 70s.
But again, we're seeing.
But you're still right about
what point is this shift going to take place?
When do the baby boomers step aside?
Right, exactly. And in reality, my students and I always argue about this in class. It's going to have to take a little bit more than the efforts that have been tried. And it's got to be an awakening at some point in the next 5 years or so.
Ratasha Smith says, yes, Wharton. And talk about the next generation future political in New Haven. Ratasha Smith's got my vote already. I don't even know what she's running for yet. We need an awakening, especially in New Haven.
And I think there was a wake-up call last night.
What was that wake-up call?
I think the wake-up call was one of, at least finding a pathway of somebody new to step up and to be involved.
I did feel that way talking to voters.
Yeah.
I think there was this general sense of, I just want something different.
There was that, and also,
a person can't overcome that.
But I'm also still concerned about the turnout. I mean, how much support, going back to the Reverend's point, how much of a turnout did you see from Tony Harp's base showing up, right? And of course, the union support came late into the
union support.
Right?
Her base was anemic.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about that, because the way she tried to poll the base, I'm wondering, and I think you might not agree with me on this one. I think she made, I don't think there's an equivalency on racial appeals. When people vote for the white guy, that's a racist appeal. I don't think it's always a racist appeal to say if you have an accomplished black elected official who we're proud in, stand up for that. But that wasn't the appeal she made. She made attacks to people's fears. Like, I don't know if you guys saw this flyer. I think
it tends to work in politics, though.
But I think this is the worst appeal, naked appeal to race I've seen in a campaign in the history of New Haven that I've seen.
The drone piece,
because she said something. She had a legitimate argument against Elliker about drones. Elliker said the police are right. They should consider drones to catch dirt bikers. Tony Harp had a good argument. She said, A, I'm worried about safety if they get too close, and B, I'm worried about a Pandora's box about privacy. Good debate. But she started going on about the campaign literature, and both sides did exaggerations of positions for campaign literature. She was going with, he wants to spy on our neighborhoods. He wants a police drone. And she built it up gradually. First, she had a scary picture of Elliker. He wants to spy on our neighbors' police drones. By last weekend, she did a flyer only to black voters where you're seeing, it's supposed to be, I think it's New Hallville, and you see a really scary drone coming like a Hitchcock picture, black and white in the window, huge, into your bedroom. Justin Elliker wants to let the police use drones to spy on neighborhoods and deal with, quote, various neighbor challenges. We all know which neighborhoods Elliker is talking about. Does that, separate from morals, ethics, that really bombed. We talked to voters all day. We did not meet a single voter of color who was scared that Justin Elliker is going to come into their window with a drone. I mean, I took something from that there were some people who voted for Elliker because he was white, and that's not cool, right? There were some white people who voted against him because they were worried about someone who didn't have connections to the black community. There were some black people who voted for Harp because she's a very successful black woman, and white people too. That's cool. I did not meet black voters who responded to this campaign of vote against him because he's a scary white guy with this really exaggerated position. I think that was a tactical mistake. She's never run that way in 32 years. She didn't even go negative. She won both her offices by running against people before mayor, her previous two. She was running against incumbents who had been arrested for breaking the law. She didn't mention it. She went high and she won.
But was that her staff or was that her? See, and going back
to
what
she made the call.
She made the call.
Because she continued it.
Sure.
It wasn't like the one-off they did on Elliker's wife and saying it was a conspiracy with Trump.
Right.
She never disavowed it, which was a mistake. But she didn't keep saying that.
But Paul,
she kept saying this one.
But in reality, this is the nature of politics, right? It sometimes heightens people's emotions and fears.
Yeah.
And so this is not as unusual as I've seen other episodes. Don't forget, I studied Cory Booker and the whole dynamics in Newark.
That's right. They went
after
after Cory Booker is not genuinely black. Yeah.
I mean, God knows, I had to do my dissertation of my first book, and boy, did I ever see some fear and scare tactics. And so,
that was within the black community. He's not a real black guy. He's really white. He comes from the outside.
It got even better. I mean, the unions got involved. The fire department took down signs around the neighborhoods, in Newark. So for me, I've seen so many tactics and approaches that a lot of this to me doesn't surprise me in terms of scare tactics.
What surprised me is that it's not usually overt since the 70s. In the 70s, we had races in New Haven that were overt appeals to the East Shore. That's why we had Ben DeLito for 10 years.
And they show up to vote.
Right. This is the first time where I've seen black voters being asked overtly to vote against someone because he's a white guy who's going to bring the police into your bedroom and watch you with a scary thing. And I don't think it worked. I don't think black voters in New Haven responded. I think all human beings will respond to an appeal toward pride and success. I don't think New Haven black voters responded at all to scare tactics and racial fears.
Well, I don't know. Just as the professor said, there are a lot of people, have done this. This is not unique in American politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some things work and some things don't.
Right.
So this one didn't work.
That's what I'm saying. It didn't work.
Right.
The whole campaign, like she said at her debate, she did great at the debate, but I was shocked when she said, the neighborhoods I represent. For 25 years, she has lived in upper middle class sections of Westville. Mm-hmm. I don't think that worked. I don't think black voters wanted to hear, I'm only your mayor. They wanted to hear, I've done great and I'm proud of what we're doing and we'll keep going on, which is what she was also saying.
Well, and it may also have been that that was her win last time against him. She won in the black community.
No, she won everywhere.
Well, she won everywhere.
He won only white votes.
Right, but she had, because he didn't have those votes in the black community, she was trying to keep those votes out of his hands. This time, I think that's what they were trying to do.
Or the black community.
I agree, but the reason I think they were wrong is because there's no question she had the black vote last time, and but also in that race, there were two other black candidates. Not one of whom wasn't perceived as the black community's candidate, and she really had a lot of white votes. She won Ward 26.
But you're talking about the primary
and the general.
But in the general, it was her and Elliker.
Right. So Elliker got only white votes. Tony Harp got a lot of white votes, and he cleaned up that community. She, like in her whole career, when they tried to knock her off in the mid-90s, state Senate seat, it was really multiracial. She's always a proud black woman, which white people, most in New Haven, do respond positively to that. But this is the first time I saw her go only for black votes. I just think the
I mean, I obviously don't have a history with this, so I don't know what the strategy was or why the strategy was what it was. But like I say, she beat Elliker last time because she got more black votes in the general.
See, I'm not agreeing with that analysis.
Why?
I think she won because she got more black votes and she got a lot of white votes.
Right. But if you just compared their white votes.
She couldn't have won last time if she got only black votes.
She couldn't have won last time if she got only white votes either.
I agree.
Okay, so when it came down to it, it was the black community that made the decision between the two of them. And the black community went with her. So she had the white votes, yes, but she had more black votes than Elliker. And she knew that Elliker was coming into that space. And so she was trying to keep him out of that space. I think this is what this is about.
Yeah.
She's trying to keep him out of that space. Say he's not going to be good for the black community. So let him get his white votes. And I don't understand the not going after white votes part, but I think she thought she'd just keep those votes that she had there and that she would.
No,
maintain.
They knew she wasn't keeping them. I mean, I know from the inside.
Okay.
They knew she wasn't keeping them. We didn't get any mail. I live in her ward, which is predominantly white.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I got one flyer in 6 weeks from her. I got daily flyers from Elliker. Got robocall, and everyone's. I walked to work on Edgewood Avenue, Ward 25, predominantly white. Not a single Harp flyer. You cross into Ward 24. It's like
so she went exclusively for the black community.
Yeah.
Well, Beaver Hills, you did see the signs.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, Wingate's also the alder there, so he's very aggressive about putting signs around in the neighborhood. So
I feel for Tony Harp. She's had a great career. She obviously didn't want to end her career this way. And I feel, but people are going to remember her as a success.
So you don't think she's going to run?
Right.
In November?
You don't think she's going to run?
Despite the Working Families Party, huh?
I really don't think she's suicidal. Because, I mean, like, after this primary, she's now the endorsed Democratic candidate. She lost resoundingly. I mean, he's the endorsed candidate. So if anything, she would only lose some Democratic votes. Now you got 18,250 independent and Republican votes, which are about 150% on his side. Where's the path to victory?
So you're saying those votes are already on his side?
Mm-hmm. They were last time. And things have changed in his favor.
So
you think she has a better chance at like Trump voters and
No. Look. You know, so there's the Paul Bass thesis.
Okay, let's hear the Wharton thesis.
No. You've already put it out there. You're very good and skillful at articulating
No, I got that
it.
from her side.
Well,
Everyone on her side told me she can't run in general. But
I do find your point on what you said on WNPR and other formats credible. That there's an increasing number of unaffiliated voters, independent voters out there who have just been increasing in the last five years or so.
Yeah, we got over 16,000 now.
Since 2013, right? I mean, which is a very valid point, especially in the downtown wards. You know, a lot of young people coming to town, a lot of empty nesters. They don't really have that party affiliation. I have experienced this firsthand as a party leader, and it's difficult to kind of shape the outcome for them to just show up, participate, be involved, be engaged when they don't believe in that kind of party tactics and approaches and affiliations. Those people, we don't know what they're capable of in a general election, right? Because they couldn't vote, obviously.
Right. Our only data point is 2013
in the primary, correct? So if that increasing number has been up there, exactly, does that mean they're going to support him? Or would they support her if she does decide to do this? And I don't know. I think it could be a good splintering, but I think it would probably lean more towards Justin. I will give credit to Justin in that, at least as opposed to what happened when he tried running the last time, you didn't see much of a presence, or from what I've heard, because I wasn't here yet. Remember, I moved to New Haven in 2014, so I just missed that. But from what I understand, he made more of a presence in the Latino black wards.
Oh, no question this
time.
Right.
So compared to what it was
he did
back in
try
2013.
last time, but he just couldn't.
But you know
he connected this time. He had people working for him.
But you know, it makes sense because in some sense he is a technocrat, right? He is not a backslapping, kind of politician. So, and some people respect it, some people don't. But there is that difference. And to be fair, it's not like Tony Harp is one either. So, it's kind of
when they're on a stage, people relate more to Harp.
Probably,
but she's more experienced. She has more substance.
But there's an enthusiasm gap.
Right. She has an enthusiasm gap as an incumbent, and he is a good listener. As is she.
So how does that translate for independent, unaffiliated voters? We don't know.
Exactly.
But we do know what happened in 2013.
Yeah.
They all broke for Elliker.
The independents?
Mm-hmm.
And remember, the gap was a lot closer, Reverend. I mean, it was amazing.
He doubled his vote
amazing.
in the general. It was all the independents.
It was amazing that gap was so narrow.
Yeah.
So narrow.
So before she was an incumbent, and like any incumbent, having people start getting mad at you because of the decisions you made, when she was just someone who was untouchable, she got none of that support. Now that base is bigger. It's all in wards that's Justin Elliker destroyed her in those wards already. Among Democrats.
Among Democrats, right.
Right. So non-Democrats you think might break for her.
But Paul, don't forget.
I don't know. That's I'm not calling it. That's the point here. I think if she runs, I mean, I think there's a path to victory possible. And it's going to be all about how she campaigns it, how she gets out there, and if she gets out there and that sort of thing. But I'm not going to call it based on
fair.
Don't
call on speculation.
Last time.
Here's the other thing: she doesn't have an organization. That's still the reason she lost yesterday. There really wasn't. I went to polling places like in the East Shore at about 9 o'clock. Reverend Kimber came and put a sign up and left. There was no one around. In Ward 7, I saw people come and vote, not knowing who to vote for. The only people greeting them were Elliker people.
But
making the case.
But is that a part of it? Because the state lawmakers did not come out there in full force.
They never deliver. People, they're overruled.
Right?
They're overrated.
Or even more importantly, don't forget Vinnie Morrow and all this. You can't ignore that.
The party chairman was not on her side.
So quintessential.
He was not on her side, you say?
Not even close.
Because he was
at Trinity Bar outside.
Yeah, I know, because he had a feud.
Right,
her administration had a feud with Martin Looney, who's state senator, who had been the first person to endorse her in 2013 and promote her candidacy. They've had very public fights between her administration and him. So
that's the problem.
Yeah.
When you have real internal divisions like that, and I'm not talking about as a former party leader. Yeah, I'm saying this just as a political scientist. We have institutional issues within the party, and that speaks towards it. I'm kind of fascinated by that.
It is fascinating.
Those kind of fractures taking place over time.
And we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. What did it say about New Haven? How divided are we by race in New Haven, and how did that show up in this election?
Well, Reverend, you probably on the front lines for that, especially in your church and community.
But politically, I mean, the fact of the matter is, my church is not just New Haveners. We have a whole lot of people in Hamden and even Cheshire. I have people coming out of Cheshire coming to Emmanuel. I joke with them that whenever I have to visit them, I have to stop and get gas, get a room somewhere to rest. So I don't really know, but I did feel the lack of enthusiasm. If that's not an oxymoron, I'm going to think more of a paradox. But I did feel the lack of enthusiasm, and I wasn't quite sure why that was the case. People were not necessarily talking. But what I also notice is, I every now and again will read the Independent and occasionally make a comment. No, I read the Independent.
I will just say you are my favorite commenter.
I read the Independent every day.
You write great pieces.
And I was just noticing the comment section. It was full of Ellicott people. There were very few people. Well, definitely yesterday.
Yeah.
But that was consistent with what's going on throughout this election. Right, so very few people were coming on.
I was seeing 50-50.
You were seeing 50-50?
Yeah.
I was.
You know what? And you know what was strange when we switched to Facebook? So we did the debate Facebook Live, totally different audience. It was almost 100% African American, 95% against the mayor. It was more of like the kind of people comment on Channel 8's website. It's not as intellectual as like the people who go on, all the people who go on the Independent. They were just trashing her the whole debate, and it wasn't based on substance.
Wow.
It was this real
persona. They were attacking her.
I think people like to trash who's in power. I think Channel 8 blew up some stuff that we didn't blow up because we didn't think she had done anything wrong. We did think there were things that went wrong this term, as with any incumbent on lead paint policy and some of the finance stuff on the school board, but was also complicated. But they went after her because an employee stole money that had a drug problem, which they immediately recovered the money and fired her. So actually, they did the right thing on that. But Channel 8, blew that up, and then they bought uniforms because someone was trying to help someone who had a drug problem. And again, like, we didn't lose money. No one got hurt. They actually did the right thing. We reported about some improper spending, and then they found some stuff through an audit where a guy had been stealing money from the payroll department slowly for 15 years under 2 mayors, and then they caught it, got the money back, fired him. So there's the kind of stuff that, like, I didn't think was that relevant to the mayor's performance, but it's something everyone in New Haven knew because Mary O'Boone really went to town on it, and because it was good for ratings. And easy to understand.
His Twitter account blows up anytime something like that
For
happens.
us, it was like a one-day story, making it clear that they acted fast. There were other things I think are critical or controversial, but I think that everyone knew that. It was part of the litany you heard.
And that was on Channel 8.
Oh God, yeah. It was like
I don't generally watch local news.
No, it was a jihad with Mary O'Boone. He was trying to get the
I was about to say his Twitter account was blowing up on this.
He was
really
trying to run her out of town. Yeah.
But I know that's no surprise. The media loves to kind of focus on, not all media obviously, but some like to kind of focus and target at least on episodes like this.
Yeah.
Right.
It's easier to understand. Someone stole money from a credit card, even if nobody did anything wrong with the credit card.
Right.
As opposed to, well, should we really be refinancing debt for $160 million for operating expenses that's going to make us bankrupt in 20 years? No one talks about that. That was the stuff we wrote about. Yeah.
Right.
but there was a credibility gap too within our administration, like you said earlier, Paul, among our staffers, and it's unfortunate. There's a part of me. I know I'm going to throw this out there, and Paul, forgive me for saying this, but I've often asked some of my own students and others, what would have happened if Wendell Harp were still alive? Because I imagine that he would be protecting her in many ways and preventing a lot of these people.
Well, the thing about Wendell Harp is that he was a brilliant strategist. He knew how to win when you lose. I remember the mayor, he would run people he knew was going to lose, and he'd be at the graduate club with the mayor then the next week deciding which minority-owned businesses were going to get opportunities and things like that.
Or school contracts he might get for projects, for building schools. But so I'm just curious as to who was on the inside, kind of that not just the brainiac sorting out all the campaign details, but a protector.
She had a big loss.
Yeah,
with Jason
again,
Bartlett.
her people.
Right.
Jason Bartlett had to leave. He was her big strategist because he was caught up in the FBI subpoena, even though he's not being arrested. His name wasn't in the subpoena. It was his department. So the real reason she had to get rid of Jason Bartlett was Unite Here controls the legislature. They support Harp, but it's a chilly relationship. She was their fourth, because she delivers on their issues, but Jason Bartlett was the roadblock to them completely controlling the mayor's office. And they always wanted Bartlett out. So once Bartlett's name was in these news stories, the condition from Unite Here to support Harp for re-election was to get rid of Jason Bartlett. So Jason Bartlett was gone, so it became a complete Unite Here operation. Unite Here's members were not enthusiastic about Tony Harp. Unite Here's members are grassroots people in our neighborhoods, and they knew that their people weren't that enthusiastic. So Taisha Walker, who's the most important alder and runs the board, she threw down for Tony Harp, believed in it, said, we're going to do this. But they, for weeks, were setting out the word they might not get this one.
That only happened in the last month or so, though.
Yeah.
I mean, if this would have started out early on, that might have been a different story.
Yeah.
But, I'm just curious as to, look, back in the day, you know better than anybody else in this room, Mayor DeLito had his Joe Carbone.
Yeah.
Cory Booker had his Mo, Butler. All right. Who was, the mayor's?
The mayor's chief of staff is Tomas Reyes.
Right. But you've never seen that kind of outwardness of his engagement of strategizing, planning it out, rooting out the people, figuring it all out, right? Andrea Scott, too. We can't ignore her.
Nobody was scared of Tony Harp.
Right. But so it's just interesting.
For better or worse. That's not a comment on her.
But it's just interesting to me that, who is that go-to person? And so I've always grappled with that over the years. And I'm not saying that as a political scientist or as the opposing party leader. I'm saying this just as a voter, as a constituent. Who is the go-to person who is kind of that, person who makes a lot of decisions
also easy
and prevents people from coming in and going out.
Also, after someone leaves, it's easy to be loses. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and talk about what they did wrong. In fact, they did a lot of things right in the Harp administration. A lot of things happened that hadn't happened that previous mayors tried to do, in some cases, for up to decades. The Brookside fence came down. 11 acres in the hill they tried to develop. They found a way to make that happen. Yale was blocking any use of the downtown Palace Theater. They found a way around it and opened up this wildly successful concert hall. They got the Old Connecticut bus depot that was just barren. They took a real risk on people who have created hundreds and hundreds of jobs and training lots of people with millions of dollars from Silicon Valley for tech jobs, middle-level tech jobs. So they did a lot that went right. But any administration also does a lot that goes wrong. And I tell you, that third term is hexed.
Wow. So is that another Paul Bass thesis?
That's another ridiculous Paul Bass thesis that could be disproved 9 ways to Sunday.
Wow.
But I've watched it and I've seen how different people roll with it. Yeah. Which we're rolling in Dateline, New Haven, 1-345 live TV .org. So dirt bikers. People talk a lot about dirt bikers, separate from drones. Is this an issue that's on your guys' radar that you think we can deal with in any way?
Well, I live right off the boulevard, so I deal with it all the time.
You had 200
the
the other day.
Yeah, I drive back. I've been back on my bike a little bit more lately, so I don't go down the boulevard. God forbid, don't ever do that on a bicycle. Did it once, never want to do it again.
I tried once, never do it again.
Never do it
again. I was going to die.
Exactly. But when I drive back from work, you can't miss them. It's amazing, even on a weeknight, that can happen. And so I was always curious, and my neighbors were always talking about it, down in City Point, because of Long Wharf in that area down there. A lot of the neighbors have been discussing this and saying, at what point are the police going to step in and do something about this? So for me, I think that it was necessity. But it was interesting that they only.
Well, what should we do? Do you have any thoughts, Reverend?
Yeah, I mean, and that is such a hard thing because I'm there on Whaley, right, and that's a drag. It's like the racing track. But I understand why the police don't chase them. Okay,
I think the whole city almost agrees with that because cops can die, the riders can die, little kids can die on the side.
Exactly, that makes complete sense. But that is the go-to when a criminal is in a motor vehicle. You go after them and you stop them and you catch them and you arrest them and you put them on trial. If you can't chase these guys, what else can you do? I don't know. The drone thing, is an idea.
It's not a magic bullet, by the way.
It is not a magic bullet. It's an idea.
And the police want to have laws where they want to be able to issue, like they did summonses the other day. They want to do summonses that really cost you some money, but also don't go on your criminal record. So right now, if they kind of figured out who you are, they have to get a warrant. It takes a while, and it's a misdemeanor. You're messed up in the criminal justice system now, and it takes a while, and you don't end up really, you just have to go to court. You don't pay any money. They want to go to your house, cost you $1,000, but you're not in the criminal justice system. Again, they have to do that surveillance because these guys who do the bikes, who tend to be older than people think, they're not one group. Right. We look at who's arrested. So some of them are people from like New London, suburbs who come here, and they go 80, 100 people, and they go circles in all the lanes, and they kick cop cars. And some of them are people right here in our city. Yeah, it's not one group.
Yeah, and but how do you stop it? It's if you can't, if chasing them is a significant issue, and it is, what do you do after that? And if the people who are responsible for, thinking about these things, I'm assuming, I don't like to assume, but I'm going to assume that they are talking with other police forces. They're talking to other, situations around the country or whatever, and asking what they're doing. I hope they're doing that. And they still haven't come up with a answer to the situation. This is just a very, very hard one. But for the people, outside, the people out of power, not in power, that sort of thing, citizens, to blame, I guess I want to say, any particular politician for not having come up with the answer to that is just.
And there are a lot of issues like that. I actually want to follow that. You just mentioned that George Carter writes in, I really enjoyed this today. Thanks for sharing. Thank you, George Carter. Inner city, exactly, Jonathan. She didn't have anyone to do the heavy lifting. So I think dirt bike is one example. There are a lot of policy issues. There are no easy fixes, too. Reverend Rusley, I'd be curious what you think about what we need in political leadership in New Haven. Because, like, for instance, one strength Toni Harp brought to the table in 2013 was her long web of relationships. I guess a web can't be long. Many years of kind of knowing whom you turn to and who's heard your name or who could get contact. So when you had social workers and teachers and firefighters and cops and others going through neighborhoods to kind of identify the people who needed young people help, and then targeting them and coming up with a good program because she knew the people, the state agencies who could bypass rules to create use that. That's a strength she brought to the table. For the next mayor, whoever's going to be, since I guess if you guys think she may be running again, maybe she will be. I thought that was the deal. What do we need in a leader right now in New Haven? What are we looking for political leadership?
I think we need in a leader a person who realizes that the government can't do everything. I don't want to sound like a Republican here, but
Jonathan, are you okay with that?
Yeah,
I see you kind of recruiting him as he starts to speak.
No. The government cannot do everything, and citizens have to step up. The motivation for them to do that. We need somebody to motivate citizens to do parts that they need to do. I talk about this in my church all the time. We've had a black superintendent for 21 years. We got another one, right? But there are things that the school can't do. They can't turn the television off.
They can't be the parent.
They can't be the parent.
They can't feed dinner.
Right.
I guess they do feed
dinner. There are things they can, but there are things that neighborhoods can do. We need to put the neighbor back in the hood, and neighborhoods need to work together for the betterment of everybody in the neighborhood. That is the kind of reality that I don't just want to be nostalgic here, but that's the reality that I grew up in, that everybody in our community. I mean, I remember I grew up, a good deal of my childhood in foster home. And I remember once that we went off to on vacation, and somebody broke into our house, and a neighbor from across the street sat on our front porch every night for the rest of our vacation. While we were away. Children respected adults. There was a woman who lived next door to us. She was an alcoholic. We didn't know the term. She was an alcoholic. We could not disrespect her in any way. We could not laugh at her. We could not talk about her. And when she was not high, we had to listen to her. We've lost that. And we've lost it thinking that if we put together a government program to help our children, that's going to help our children. It is not. We need to have real grassroots efforts within our neighborhoods, and our government needs to be courageous enough to say we can't do everything. There are things we can do, but there are things that you have to do as well.
And I think that's part of what Mayor Harp did with some of the USTAT stuff. I think Mayor Stefano did that in 1994 and 5 and developed the original Livable City Initiative, which is the idea that people want to be here. This was the time people were leaving New Haven rather than coming. You'll take responsibility for properties in your community gardens, becoming the watchdog for small violations in your neighborhood and work alongside inspectors. It was that kind of vision, that kind of like citizen-led government respond partner.
And how did it turn out?
That became the scandal when the FBI came in, because politics came in. A certain reverend who is now the reverend who got Tony Harp in some trouble started getting into that money.
but okay. So here's the question.
Sorry, I know you don't want to go there.
Why was there money involved? Because the way I'm thinking about this, it's not government, because that becomes goes back into the government doing it. When it becomes government money, government funded, the government now is controlling it. The government is
it was paying someone on the outside in the community.
So why is money involved? We didn't have money in government programs and money involved in our communities when we were doing things.
So
like
maybe we don't need to be looking. While leadership matters, maybe we shouldn't be looking at the leaders to lead as much as the neighbors.
So Paul, let me chime in at this point, because it's just kind of funny. I was lecturing about this yesterday in class. And I think the Reverend will find this interesting. I was discussing how I was going back to Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, Eat Social Capital. I'm sure that's what you eat for breakfast every morning, Paul Bass. And it's a great book about what you're touching on. Mm-hmm. Social engagement, involvement, being concerned in the community, everything you're focusing on. But the one thing he could not stop talking about was that for the younger generation in particular, there aren't enough affiliated people going back to church, temple, mosque, whatever.
Right.
And yet, at the organic roots of community involvement, City Hall doesn't always have to be there, as you're stressing.
Right.
And they always respond to anyone who does the work. Like in New Haven, when Kim Harris started organizing people, politicians immediately fell over each other to try to do whatever they wanted when they did a whole one city coalition.
But that's so important. I mean, that is so critical. So I brought this out not just with Putnam. I mean, I'm a big fan of Chuck Hamilton. He was my parents' professor and advisor at Columbia University. He has a great book called The Black Preacher, written in the 60s, about how so often within the community level, why do we need a city hall when at the local level we have our pastors and leaders who can do the same thing, mosque leaders, temple leaders, whatever. So that's missing in a lot of this. So Putnam stresses that, and I try to bring this out to my students. And I was taken back how many students are actually involved with their churches and their mosques and temples. Actually, it's probably double the number that I normally would get, because typically I'm lucky to get 5 or 6 students out of 30. Well, yesterday I saw about a dozen hands raised, and I was like, "Wow, this is more than usual."
Yeah, I don't know.
And they spoke about this. Said, "Well, it really has to be oftentimes left up to religious institutions to kind of lead a lot of this." I also believe, by the way, that management teams. I was a community board president back in Jersey City, right? My neighborhood association was very much involved. That's how I know Chief Alston. And so, a lot of this is so important that it's got to be a pathway where it's not so much just about City Hall, but also religious institutions, management teams, neighborhood associations to play a role too. Right. They have to be in partnership.
But let me break in here. The challenge in what needs to happen is that we don't have neighborhood churches anymore. Yeah. When I talk about New Haven from my pulpit, half the congregation turns off because we don't live here.
He's not wrong, Paul.
That sort of thing. So, and then you have the reality of the mega church.
Yes.
Right. Where, people go to these places that are far away from where they live, and the focus is on the individual. It's not on the community. It's not on the group. It's all about individual. It's not even Christian as far as I'm concerned, because it's too individualistic. But that there is where our challenge is, because a lot of people, for example, a lot of the older people who attend my congregation used to live in New Haven, and then they, times change, situations change for them, whatever, and they bought homes in other parts of the state, and then but they come back because this is their church, but they don't feel that this is their city. Okay, I used to I worked for about 1.5 years in Detroit. In one of the major churches in Detroit. Now, there are a significant amount of black churches in Detroit that are, big. When white flight happened, black communities and black congregations went into these churches that they left behind, and these, have these huge churches. And we had two services. We had this, 7:30 service, 11 o'clock service. At the 7:30 service, we generally had all of the kids who were whose parents worked in the factories and at the car factories, who had taken that money and sent them to college. They came back, moved to the suburbs, but the suburbs wasn't doing their kind of church. So they come into New Haven. They came into Detroit.
Right.
We locked their cars up in the parking lot. They got their church on, and then so we were having gated community church.
Wow.
And now look at Detroit. Yeah. The transition is happening now, but it's not happening with the majority of the people who were there. And all of these, huge black churches, and the black community is, decimated. And then, they elected that mayor who, I was here. I was away. Well, I was here. Well,
you mean Kwame?
Kwame, right.
Yeah,
I actually called back down there because I have, Morehouse brothers and brothers who went to the same divinity school as I. I would call back. It's like, I don't get it. What are y'all seeing? And they're like, oh, Sam, you're an elitist. Like, no, just tell me what you're seeing in this guy. But they elected him, right?
The hip hop mayor. Remember?
The hip hop mayor, right? But I also saw a hour 47-minute sort of a documentary that Dan Rather did. It's on YouTube, and the school board. They've had like 6 different superintendents in as many years almost. Okay. But the churches weren't doing anything because their congregation didn't live in the city.
Couldn't vote.
Their congregation couldn't vote, and they were not involved in what was going on in the city. So, bam.
So what I was stressing in my class yesterday was that what does that mean when these are detached, elements of religious institutions?
Exactly.
We have a problem, not just City Hall, but even in our communities when it comes to even church institutions.
Well, we also have
in our schools, and
it trickles down.
But we are fortunate to have 2 incisive minds committed to our community.
Thank you.
Reverend Samuel Ross Lee and Professor Jonathan Wharton. Thank you so much for coming on to help us run down the election.
Thank you for having me.
It is always a pleasure to hear you two gentlemen speak with you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the comments. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. And this is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long in New Haven, our community, and our radio station, WNHH FM. To the heights.